So for our audience today, we have a good cross section of media representation, from years of experience to, from print and from broadcast media. I'd love to transition us to inviting you to either post in the chat or go ahead and maybe get your camera back on. Our panelists bring some experience in community-centric focus to local media. I'd love to hear from some of you about your thoughts on why and how that's important, and what your thoughts are on what the future of local media should or could look like. I know we have a couple that are eating lunch too, but feel free to keep your camera off, but I'd love some pipe in. Or is it more appropriate to have us use our reaction buttons? I can look for hands up and then we can have some orderly fashion to that. Oh, John, I think you have everybody's camera turned off. Are you able
While we're waiting on technical support and people to finish chewing, I'll just say one of the great things about the American Journalism Project model is that once we get a CEO and an editor-in-chief in place, the funders step back and let the journalists do the journalism. And that, to me, that's so important, and one of the big reasons why we were attracted to this model.
So we got a little bit quiet there. Let me ask folks to use your reaction button if you would like to make a comment. And I'm both watching the chat and looking through the gallery here, so I'll keep an eye out for that. Or John, pipe in if you see somebody that I need to give attention to. I do see a question from Katie White's in the chat. And Katie's question reads, I'm interested in learning more about how the documenters get selected and how they learn about the program, what kind of training or vetting happens there.
I see a +1 there too. Happy to dig in on all of this. The selection process, so we put up assignments that are selected by our staff. So of all of the dozens and hundreds of meetings we could go to at any given time, literally we are following in Chicago alone about 200 agencies. So meetings all day, every day. We select which meetings we'd like documenters to go to. We open it up with technology. They're able to apply for assignments. And then we as staff are selecting documenters largely based on, giving folks a chance. We want to spread out as many opportunities as possible to people, but we also pair them up. So we have 2 documenters go in Chicago, go to every meeting. I believe it's the same case in Detroit and Cleveland and Minneapolis as well. So they get the experience of having sometimes more experienced documenters paired up with new documenters. There's a lot of ways in which the different sites have their criteria for selecting how documenters are chosen, but it typically is on the lines of spreading opportunity out, and then also selecting documenters who, in some cases, are tracking a certain issue across agencies. How they learn about it, this one's actually pretty easy. We've surveyed documenters, and the most common way to hear about the program is through other documenters. So word of mouth is number 1. Documenters tell their parents, they tell their friends, their neighbors, the people in their community, and folks join based on that recommendation. And the training and vetting. The training, all documenters are required to take an orientation with us before they're able to take on paid assignments. So they take on an orientation, which gives them the basics of the program, the organization, the civic ecosystem, the layout. And then part 2 of that is a training we call Cover Local Government. So that introduces documenters to, a little bit of media law, the Open Meetings Act, the Fair Report Privilege, the basics of reporting. Really what we're doing is taking a bunch of journalistic skills and break them apart, bucketizing them. So journalists do a bunch of things. They may take notes, they may operate cameras. What we're saying is most individuals, anyone can do any of those functions if we're able to sort of break them apart and make them understandable, digestible. So the trainings that we host are really aligned with that, sharing skills, democratizing the functions of journalism, and pairing that with the values and the vision of why we're here to begin with, to make government more transparent, to inform, engage, and equip our communities. So I think I got everything there, but those are some of just the baselines of how we select, how documenters learn about a program and the training that we do.
So I'm looking and I don't see any hands up yet. So I'll just continue to encourage that and use of the chat. But Daryl, I'm curious myself. You're in the disruptor space, really. This is such a novel approach. I'm curious as to some of the ways that you've been able to knock down some of the barriers that you sometimes see when you're in a disruptor space. You're introducing a new model. Sometimes there is apprehension about that. What have been some of the ways that you've gotten early buy-in to be able to create a successful program?
In a lot of ways, I think it's a lot of intentionality. It's being very open with our processes, being very sharing with them. But I guess back to your point about disruption, I think that there are definitely elements of disruption within City Bureau. The organization itself is, I think, drafting a new blueprint for how community media can exist, how participatory media can exist. But I also say there's a big element of repair that we're doing. Not just tearing down, but what is the replacement theory for this work? A lot of what I think I'm seeing in the media landscape across the country is that we are not going to see these giant, all-encompassing newspapers in the future. When you ask about collaboration, and I'm talking about, what does a more networked field look like? That's really what I mean. What is the reparative value, the corrective value of having lots of different folks who are working together in a network sense to do the best for their communities? And that is that civic infrastructure. So when you ask how we break down barriers, I think it's typically around that vision for the future that is honestly less elitist, less top down, less sort of we know all, and much more networked, much more bottom up, much more inclusive, much more involved and engaged with the people who we're trying to work with and serve, not just serving them, but being in community, in conversation, in dialogue constantly with them.
We have a question in the chat from Roseanne Shannon. She's asking if one of you can address interaction with local traditional media. What are their typical concerns, if any?
Daryl, can I kick off and then hand it to you on that one? Just because I remember thinking back to WDT. When we brought it into public radio, I don't think everybody fully understood what we were going to be doing. But there was that buy-in, and when you see people in the community, and we've been doing a lot of community engagement at the station prior to this, but when you see people in the community who are interested in understanding how journalism works, that want to be engaged, I think that started opening up reporters to realize that their relationship with the community, may have been too much of a distance. And we did have pushback. There was a certain journalist who felt like, why would I trust a documenter's work? And it's like, well, it is vetted, it is trained, and it is a partnership, right? So I think there were some objections there, but what's been really amazing to watch now is, I think it was a few weeks ago, the Detroit Free Press published an article that was produced with work that documenters did, and they were credited in the article as having been covering the meetings. And so I think it's very much possible, especially when you're able to show those examples of how this actually helps organizations do their jobs better and more equitably. And I think it starts, again, like you were saying, Daryl, people finding out about the program through other documenters, and you start having this new interest in local journalism. People are better understanding how to engage civically through the process. I know we had surveyed documenters who had participated the first year even, and the results said their trust in local media increased. They better understood local news. They better understood city government. So I think when you're able to just prove that out, and now as again we're seeing with these collaborations, I'm very excited to see more in Cleveland. Other local media start recognizing too, oh, okay, there's something here. We can actually is this a resource that we can also use? This is actually supporting our ability to do our work as well.
Yeah, I'd say one concern we've heard in the past is around accuracy. can we trust, like you said, can we trust documenters reporting? And my answer is always, it's edited. It's edited just like any other piece of reporting is. So yes, we can trust it. And then I think we also get a second question, which is a bit of, some folks can see it as a threat initially, like, is this meant to replace my role as a journalist? And the answer is absolutely not. This is supplementary. We are building out more of what journalism can do, bringing it closer to the public. So it's not meant to replace journalists entirely. It's meant to be additive. But as we see journalism jobs decreasing, we also have to wonder, as we're building out this additive value, what are the parts of it that, in the worst case scenario, exists as a foundation for a new kind of media as well. So we're kind of looking at it in both directions.
Yeah, and one of the experiments we did here in Cleveland was to bring Solutions Journalism Network to town to get people used to working together and collaborating and sharing. And that's another feature of the AJP model, is that all the content is free. We want other people to take it. And if they want to, sink their teeth into a small part of something and run with it, so be it. That's what this model is for.
I see Paul Allen's hand up, and then Katie, I see your question in the chat. If we could go to Paul first, and then I will address the question in the chat.
Hi, I had a quick question for Michelle, actually. There was a question that was asked of you earlier about what funders are interested in more so than other things. And I just wonder if you can elaborate on that a little bit more. I know that you said that there are opportunities for funders to be more long-term in helping build out organizations. So I'm just wondering if that is, if it's the end result is still the sustainability of that organization, or are funders looking at more long-term help with building out the individual organizations?
I hope it's more long-term. And again, how that evolves from, a launch of something new, or bringing a program, like I said, like documenters, or launching like the organization in Cleveland Upfront Capital to be able to actually support that kind of infrastructure and give that organization the opportunity to be able to generate new streams of revenue, to grow their newsroom and grow their impact. But I think there's always going to be opportunities. Again, AJP pulls away pretty quickly. We make multi-year investments because we want to make sure that the things that we're funding, that the organization is able to sustain those. But there's going to be, we've seen organizations that have had certain beats, certain topics that are continuing to get support for those areas based on funders who are interested in specific issues. We've seen some of them getting more operational support, just recognizing again that kind of evolution of that this is a core part of our community's needs, like an arts institution. And some based on projects, we've seen them supporting collaborations. I think the exciting thing about this field, like Daryl was even alluding to, is that it's being invented and evolving every day. The nonprofit news industry, if you will, I think it's been just a little over a decade. But you've seen how in public media, public broadcasting, which also provides a civic good, they have membership models. They also receive grants. They also have major giving programs. And so I think that those models are absolutely possible to create that sustainability. And I think organizations need to have a really solid start. I think that's the one thing we've seen in the beginning, is being able to build that core infrastructure for the organization to be able to continue to grow and thrive on its own. We're not interested at all in being involved in editorial content. We are very much, looking at this from the back of the house and a strategy, but not, we want communities to actually drive the needs and the decisions that the news organizations themselves make.
So in the chat, Katie's question is, can we talk a little bit about multiple languages? There are so many people who are disenfranchised if they are non-native English speakers. So is there a place for them as creators and as readers?
Yes, huge yes. Love this question. Absolutely. We've tested out different approaches to this in the different documentary sites. One beautiful thing about the network is that we're all working on a very similar process and structure, but everyone all across all the sites approach their work differently. So we're constantly learning from those challenges and successes. We have had several documenters, for example, Spanish-speaking documenters go to meetings and document meetings in Spanish. So where that meeting was in English, there would be no materials that would be published from that meeting in any other language. We can have documenters who speak X, Y, Z language go, as long as they speak English as well, and translate, document, live tweet, produce notes in the language of their community. We've also worked with stations like Univision to have documenters go on air and talk about their work to different audiences. So there are many ways in which we are, I think, getting closer to cracking this puzzle. I don't think we've gotten there just yet, but with the right case example, the right city, I think we'll really see a huge leap forward in that area of work.
And keep in mind too, it's not just different languages, but it's also here in Cleveland, I think 67% of the residents of the city don't read above a 4th grade level. So how do you create content, audio, video, social, that is also digestible? And, we all have one of these things and shareable, and it's trusted. So I think that's something to consider as well.
In the chat, Chris Cox asks how the Documenters program can be adopted in one's community. That's first part. Her second part, his or her, sorry. How can a current organization who's already working in the media adopt the program, or that is working in media adopt the program?
This is why I guess it's one of those all roads lead through me questions. You talk to my team. We are working right now with John and folks in Omaha on ideally a documentary program for Omaha. We're talking to other folks in Atlanta and Fresno, other cities, folks who want to build these programs. We're basically providing technology, material support, one-on-one consulting, the sort of communications hub that allows us all to connect across programs. And we're helping folks build out documentary sites in their area. So really it's just getting conversation going and we go from there.
So Daryl, I think this next question from Summer Miller in the chat is also for you. What are the documenters paid? And then is this considered freelance position?
Sure, they are paid hourly. The range differs by city, but it's between $16 and $20 for any given documentary site. The average amount paid out for any assignment is, I think, around $75. Meetings range from anywhere from an hour to 10 hours, 11 hours. So documentaries are paid hourly, and it is technically it's a contract position, but I think some documenters definitely see it as freelancing. That's a kind of term that can be applied in many different ways, but yeah, technically it's freelancing to some folks, but it's really, legally speaking, contract work.
Okay, momentarily I'm going to move from chat to hands up. I see Gladys has her hands up. We'll take you, Gladys. We'll take Miles, and then we'll move back to chat.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Gladys Salinas with United by Culture Media out of Lexington, Nebraska. So I'm super excited to be in the room because we're out of Greater Nebraska. And Katie definitely asked some questions that we're interested in. We're looking into engaging our Latino community. We're more than 60% Latino in our community. More than half of our population speaks Spanish. And the general consensus of our leadership says that our Latino community is not engaged. But the news is all in English. All of the city, county, school board information is all in English. So we just started, we just incorporated in April, and we're just starting, and we're looking into developing and building a nonprofit media company here in rural Nebraska. So my question is, if you have had, I know there's some funders in the room, how can is there data, and where would I find it to be able to say, hey, this is the reason why people are not engaging? I see it. I have lived experience. My parents have lived experience. But where do I find the data saying that because we don't have the information, we don't engage? And then how do we prove the point to the foundations and to all of the community that says that we're not engaged? The reason why Spanish-speaking media and other language media is necessary.
I think that's a free for all for panelists, either one of you who wants to jump in.
I was going to point it to Michelle, actually. I feel like there's a lot of data around, but Michelle, I don't want to put you on the spot. You might know about.
Yeah, that is where you look at data that just show local funders that there's a need for what you're proposing. Is that what you're talking about? Like
right, just the general thought you had mentioned. Hey, we had talked about how it has proven that if individuals are informed, then they're more civically engaged. So just that general thought, and then adding obviously the layer of the language piece, but I don't know if that data or research has been done yet, right?
I know Alan's dropping a link. I'm going to look for another one. There is a lot of data even on our website just around kind of that, what even Alan was talking about earlier on this call about what happens when local news is going away. What's the role? How does that actually impact communities? I don't think I have something offhand, but I can dig up some stuff for you. We definitely have data that I think could be useful for you in making that case.
Gladys, I would also invite you to, if you would like to maybe do a private chat to one of the panelists in the event that they have follow-up information they'd like to share with you after today's discussion. I'm going to keep moving on and let Miles take the floor because he's had his hand up for a little bit.
Thank you, Miles Davis with Noise. And so my question is around engagement as well. We're working with the North Omaha, and we find it a constant challenge in order not only to get people to engage with the content that we produce, but also get people to engage with producing the content. And so just some more putting it on the radar of being like even deeper with the creativity of how to get people to engage, but then also like, is there certain tools or tips that you have in order for us to really not only get people to engage with the content, but recruit people to do the work? Because that's been a challenge that we've been dealing with as well.
Jared, maybe you can share some wisdom from how you got folks initially interested in documenters.
Yeah, the engagement question, that's always a hard one. I definitely think it takes time. Maybe I'll start with the other side of the question, the getting people to engage as producers. That I'd say, I think a big part of it is infrastructural, easing the friction by which people, the friction that they encounter in participating. So like, this is as simple as talking about the number of clicks that it takes to get to the spot where you can apply to be a producer, or like, how long does it take people to get to the actual meat of it? So reducing friction points, that kind of word of mouth sharing, I think has been really critical for us. So when folks are hearing from their neighbors and their friends and their family about a certain thing, I think they are much more inclined to say like, okay, what is that? Where do I go? Which brings back to friction, making it easy once they get there to find you. I think those are mostly infrastructural points, having the systems that allow for a pipeline of folks to come in. I think that people who are equipped to produce are more likely to be consumers of quality media. I'm sure there's a really good case study that could be made about that, which I hope to get to one day. But when we think about this concept of like informing, engaging, and equipping people, I've been saying it's not enough to just inform people. Engagement is hard. When you're equipping folks, when they understand how media is made, media can be very opaque. When they get how it's made and understand that they have ownership and equity, like a stake in it, and have agency in that, I think folks are more likely to engage with media content. So I think this is a big area. I hope that's useful in some way, but I think I'd love to pull that aside and talk further about it when we have more time, because I think it's a lot in there.
Okay, we'll move back to the chat. For those of you who've had questions, I'll just remind you to put your hand down, and except for unless you have a new one. And then I'll keep my eye on both screens. Alexia is in the chat. She's asking, have individual documenters had to change or adapt their tactics as some civic meetings have become more contentious and or potentially unsafe?
That's a great question. Have individual documenters had to change their tactics? That's a good question. I'm going to think on that one a bit more. Also, my colleague Max is here too. Max, if you have a thought on this, feel free to jump in. But when I think about documenters having to change their tactics, I mean, I think the answer is obviously yes. They also learn that through our trainings. So when they're coming, they're going to meetings, they're coming back to the central repository of work of the message board. They're able to ask documenters questions about their tactics. They're able to attend trainings on live tweeting, on taking notes. So they're able to kind of refine their process or how they approach the work. And so in that sense, I'd say documenters are in a state of continual learning. I think they're always kind of evolving their tactics. And as the network that is trying to be the hub for sustaining their work, we are also learning from them how to evolve our tactics. And then we're kind of feeding that back out to the next documenter. So it's the network effect is this constant loop of learning, like collective learning and like collective adaptation. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, I think we have to get into very deep specifics on, what those tactics are and how they're evolving over time.
The one thing that I'd add to that, Daryl. Oh, sorry, Monique.
You're fine. Go ahead.
The one thing that I'd add is that because of the remote nature of so many public meetings during the pandemic, one of the main adaptations that documenters have taken is being able to being able to document remotely. So where in the past there might have been contentious in-person arguments or discussions, documenters are much more able to participate than they would have been when meetings were held in buildings where accessibility was a challenge or where it was more difficult to be able to hear what was being said and by whom. Back to you, Monique. Sorry about that.
No worries. Roseanne Shannon's in the chat. She's asking, have any of your funders ever pulled support over content disputes?
Nope. Never happened. I've never heard a whisper of it, honestly. I think we're fairly blessed with really great funding partners. And I think that relationship tends to be much more of a relationship. Like we're talking, we're discussing issues. So the easy answer there is no funders ever pulled funding over content disputes with us.
We got Jeff Yost in the chat. He says, a mantra of our community building practice is change happens along the lines of relationships at the speed of trust. So journalism has historically been steeped in skepticism. What lessons have all of you learned to help all of us facilitate this transition to media coverage that is more collaborative and trust-based?
John's off to a good start by doing this. I wish this kind of conversation had happened 4 or 5 years ago for us. I think as more people get into the ecosystem and funding journalism, it's important to listen and to learn from what others are doing. I feel like the learning curve will maybe be a little shortened as more people get on board because you're able to learn what works, what doesn't work, and get going out of the gate maybe a little quicker than we did here in Cleveland.
Paul Allen has his hand up. I see John Heaston also posting.
For a second?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm not a journalist. I'm a community development guy. Maybe the follow-up question here is, what have you guys found is sort of what's the healthy balance? Because we do need to continue to be skeptical of much of what we hear. Mm-hmm. So what's the, what's the balance? What, we haven't been doing a lot of this in Nebraska for very long. So we'd love to learn from all you guys' experience in terms of how do we sort of craft that so we're creating reasonable expectations off the front end as well.
Well, the great thing about nonprofit news is it's not reliant on clicks. I've been told by the Cleveland.com, formerly the Plain Dealer, that they aren't covering some of what we do simply because it doesn't drive enough traffic. So there's less, really no impetus for a nonprofit newsroom to try to, be sensational or drive people to a website or whatnot. So I think it removes that layer that you're not feeling pressure from someone in New York, or, I know you guys mentioned the potential takeover. It takes that out of the equation.
It looks like Miles has a piggyback comment on this, and then Paul, I still see your hand up, so we'll move to you next.
Just wanted to talk a little bit about the trustworthiness that we at Noise try to create with the community. It's a lot similar to community development. I think that, and then we also take kind of the influencer approach. And so there's lots of people that are stationed in the community that the community already trust, whether that be an organization, whether that be an individual. And so we try to make sure that we're making that connection specifically with the individual, because it makes it easier for us to create a relationship with one person that already has a relationship with multiple people, or people trust what they're saying. And so really speaking through them is what we've been trying to do, or trying to incorporate in all of our work. And so that has helped us to on a small scale be a trustworthy news source in the community, is by allowing community members to speak. And I think that that's a great, even a better reason for documenters to come to Omaha. But just that's the approach we've taken. Is kind of like the social media influencer approach, where we're seeing people on Facebook, we're seeing people on Instagram that are getting people to listen to them, whether it's them complaining about their dog, whether it's them complaining about their job or whatever, or whether it's them talking about community. And so just figuring out who those people are and identifying who the community is already listening to, and then using them as a basis to create connection between the organization and community.
Yeah, I'll just add on that before we pivot. The work in Cleveland and with the work that we do at HAP, but startups, but also supporting organizations as they grow is kind of grounded in that. One, understanding the community information needs, but having community ambassador programs, building community advisory boards so that there is representation of community members and diverse communities within the structure of that organization's founding, its growth, and on a daily basis. So I think that's one example. And like I said, things like documenters, where people are getting directly engaged in this way and having those experiences. And I feel like, it's good. I think it's good in some places to teach skepticism to residents, but not just general skepticism, like, I just don't trust local government. But if you can all of a sudden actually play a role in holding local government accountable by increasing this transparency, when you're seeing that and doing that work, it's actually resulting in change, and it's a more effective way to apply that skepticism. We've also seen several nonprofit news organizations in our portfolio who also provide a lot of training around like how to know what you're looking at on the internet is actually real or not. So just, I think the nonprofit news organizations and models like this can help re-engage residents and build more trust between them and local media, and between local media and the community as well, with the reverse. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll go back on.
Thank you all for that discussion. I appreciate that very much.
Paul, we'll let you jump in now.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, going off of what Miles was talking about just a second ago, we're actually moving. We do a morning show live on Facebook, and we're kind of moving into that influencer space where people are starting to trust what it is that we're talking about, and that's why our collaboration and partnerships with Noise and the Reader and the other groups are crucial, because we can kind of bring some of that to them. One thing that we're running into, though, and I think this also happened to Noise at one point too, was there's a little bit of being accused of because we are getting grants or nonprofit dollars, or there's groups that are helping pay for what it is that we're doing, that we're some kind of that we're being influenced by those groups. So as a matter of fact, our governor at one point tried to act like Noise and what was entity that was being paid for by the Democrats or something, and so that we're a legitimate news source. And so I wonder if you guys can answer how is it that with this new move into philanthropy, paying for news desks, how do we avoid that the stigmatism of private groups being the ones that are funding us?
Yeah, it's funny, Paul, and that's a really good question. When we made our announcement a few weeks ago, while the response was overwhelmingly positive on social media, we got accused of launching both a liberal and a conservative rag, and that we would be pulling the strings behind the scenes. But that's, as I said earlier, that's not the case at all. Our goal is to fund it and then get out of the way. And we're very, very committed to the fact that once these two positions are hired, we're not dictating anything. The editor-in-chief, in conjunction with their team, will decide what they're covering. And it could be us, frankly. And that's something that we had to convince folks internally that's not a bad thing. You know, we want people to cover what's important to the community. You know, we have 40,000 kids in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, and there is not a single reporter covering that in Cleveland on a daily basis. And it's just the void that has been left. We need to start to fill it, and Philanthropy needs to fund it and get out of the way.
I'm going to hop into the chat. Melissa has a question there. I'm still keeping an eye on hands up if you have questions that you want to just pose on the microphone. This is Melissa's question. She said, this one goes back to discussion around civic engagement. So what role do you see for documenters during election cycles and voter education and engagement?
Oh, sorry, I was answering Paul there in the chat. I was jumping off the other question. Let me get back in here. What role do we see for documenters during the election cycle? Interesting question. I think, again, I'd go back to the real reality that all the different documenters sites kind of apply their documenters in different ways. I'll give an example. The American Rescue Plan funds that are being dispersed around the country, we're seeing a lot of that show up in our scrapers. So we're able to track these ARPA funds across different sites. You know, we're able to kind of galvanize around a central theme or topic. The same can be said around elections. You could add more documenters during the election cycle. You could have documenters, you know, track specific candidates, specific agencies, specific themes within that cycle. If one wanted to, you could have documenters. We've had in the past documenters engage in political forums. So asking candidates questions, things like that, collective or gathering questions from their communities and publishing those questions. So there are different ways in which you could have documenters, not just cover public meetings, but engage in that civic act on elections in varying degrees.
And I'll add real quick, John and I actually met in scenic Mansfield, Ohio, where Jay Allred runs, it's called the Richland Source. And while we were down there, they had actually sponsored the mayoral debate that we got to attend. And just here in Cleveland, Lawrence, our head documenter, was one of the hosts of the recent mayoral debate here too. So I think there are even direct ways for documenters and other folks, other journalism folks, to get involved through events and various other civic participation.
I see that you have your hand up, Miles. Do you have an additional question?
Yes, it kind of changed because I've heard some things. And so I am not a journalist. I am also a social media business guy, I would say. And so with that, we're a heavily digital platform. And so how do it kind of goes in connection with the election cycle too. We work with Get Out the Vote. And so how do we continue to engage people in the community, not only on a digital level, but how do we take that to where we're actually getting them to move? Because it's a hard thing for us we can get people to engage with us on social media. We can get them to comment, to like, to share. But that doesn't always translate into them actually having a movement in the community. And so we're trying to figure out how we're getting people truly civically engaged, not just engaged with the civic conversation, but truly getting them to the polling places, truly getting them to, whether that be any other public meeting. I hope this makes sense. I kind of got jumbled with all of the other comments that are made, but I can get people engaged on social media, but more of the actual walking the talk.
I don't know if Daryl or Alan have anything to add. I am noticing that there are a number of links that have been posted in the chat. For those of you who've asked questions, there are a couple follow-up responses there. And John Heaston has posted a number of comments also in the chat. So if you haven't taken a peek at what's in the chat, take a peek over there. Any of our panelists want to respond to Miles's question?
No, I'll just say that's a great question, Miles. And I need to dig into this myself, but this Vote Your Voice from the Southern Poverty Law Center is something that just was raised yesterday. It sounds like a really wonderful initiative that tackles a lot of the different parts of civic engagement. So I'm interested to learn more about that.
Okay. We reached a little bit of a lull with questions. So if you have some that are burning that you'd like to get in before we near close out this afternoon, I'd invite you to either post them in the chat or raise your hand. We can call you in the microphone. In the meantime, I'll fill it with a little bit of space. I'd love to ask any one of our panelists if there is a question you wish you would have gotten asked this afternoon that you have not yet received that you'd like to share about. I have a question that, because I'm in the classroom, I'm curious about. I'm in the classroom with our Generation Y peeps, day in and day out, and I will tell you, they don't consume news media in the ways that are traditional, in the ways that we all grew up with. So often, they're not reading the World Herald, they're not watching the TV stations. I'm curious as to the ways Documenters has worked to reach our younger generation folks. And then especially I even think about, the generation that's coming behind Generation Y. I have a 13-year-old. And so, the younger generation is all digital. Like they can be sitting next to each other in a room and they're texting. What are the things that you've done to break through the clutter, if you will, to reach that audience, the audience that is our future? We want to keep them informed and engaged as well.
Mm-hmm. I'd say my sort of foundation answer there is to bring them in. Like part of the beauty with Documenters is that people can become news producers. So if we have younger folks who are saying, I want to figure out how to use TikTok for news, my answer is, let's do it. Let's figure that out. We will pay you to go to a public meeting, get that information to the public. And, if you want to use that content that you've seen to make a TikTok video, I'd say that sounds wonderful. Let us know. We'll figure out how we can share it out and, put it into the community. So I think the best part, my favorite part about the Documenters community isn't always that we are covering the public meetings. It's that this network is taking shape in real time. That is helping itself. It's like self-support that is kind of weaving itself, and that younger folks, older folks are working together. They're being trained together. They're going on meetings together. It's one of the few intergenerational spaces I can think of. You can think of like church or the beach. I also think of Documenters as being a place where folks who are younger and older are in the same room, side by side, learning together, acting together, being civically engaged together, exchanging, the latest technology around information, and some of the more older technologies and figuring out what that balance is. So my short answer is bring them into the fold. If we have new ideas, let's bring it in.
Monique, that also raises the next question, or a great question, is where the next generation of journalists coming from? And so we're also looking at how, there aren't student newspapers in high schools anymore. So or at least not in Cleveland. So how do we expose kids in middle school and high school to the fact that journalism can be a career? And to Daryl's point, it doesn't just involve a newspaper. It can be social media. There can be 100 other ways to produce journalism. So I think that's something that, as Michelle said, they're committed to the long-term success and sustainability in the cities that they're supporting. Well, then, we also have to look at where 20 years, 15 years from now, those journalists are coming from. And I think Documenters is a great way to expose them to that as well.
Thank you for that, Alan. Miles.
I was going to add, we have a junior contributors program. So we work with high school and college students. They produce a good amount of our stories on noise. And so what I've seen is that young people are interested in civic engagement. And then we talked about earlier, just kind of lessening the friction. And so maybe that is through TikTok, maybe that's through Reels on Instagram, just kind of lessening that friction, but then also giving them the confidence, because they see, a lot of the times the young people are seeing people that are inviting them to be civically engaged are celebrities, or they're people with major influence. And so they don't really see themselves as someone able to get someone activated. They feel like they have to be a celebrity status in order to get people to listen to what they have to say. And so I think that inspiring confidence in youth as well, and letting them know that they do have a part to play, is something that we've tried to incorporate in our training of young journalists as well. So that was just a comment on that.
I would also add that I think broadening the definitions of some of these fields is really a great way to, if we broaden the idea of civic engagement, for example, like I think traditionally civic engagement has been voting every 4 years. Not enough, right? Like there's many, many, many more ways to be civically engaged. Join our sort of mutual aid program, like there are so many ways to be civically engaged. So I think talking to younger folks about that, expanding what the definition is, can be expansive in terms of who comes in. Same with journalism. I think expanding the definition of who can be a journalist and what journalists can do. Journalists as conveners, as facilitators, as these like on-demand investigators, like Outlier Media in Detroit. Thinking of journalism and civic engagement in broader terms, I think will open up the field to more folks finding ways to get engaged.
Yeah, when we presented to our board in June, we actually closed, our last slide was a quote from Christopher Norris at WHYY in Pittsburgh. And he said the reason the George Floyd case captured the attention of the world is because there was a brave young woman who committed an act of journalism. And that just summed up everything we were trying to do right there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, Alan, the acts of journalism, and I think that's the place with Documenters. It doesn't have to mean that you're constantly engaging or you become a, capital J journalist as a career path. I think limiting it to just college students who are going through a formal program, I think, is actually a lot of what has contributed to the perception, in many cases, the reality of the elitism of local media. A lot of, I think the excitement of being able to do work locally. I'm hoping that continues to be of interest when you think about people opening local businesses and that real place-based work, which I think is resonating with a lot of younger people, even as the world becomes more global in terms of where you have access to do work and where people can live. For a long time, it was like, if you're working at a local news organization, like success is moving to a national outlet. That was a success for a journalist. And I feel like these really inclusive ways of engaging and being part of the process and committing acts of journalism are really going to transform the field. And I think it goes back to that idea of a field of abundance where you have more people who are involved in this and understanding these values and practices. And I think it's really hard, even coming from working in broadcast, to transform an organization that already thinks a certain way, to be able to invite that in, and not just the participation, but we're going to, you're not just seeing yourself in the work, but actually the way the work's being produced, like using TikTok, like having that partnership with younger people and people in the community who say, this is going to work. This is going to work for the people I know. This is how they're going to get it. This is that form of communication that's going to matter to them, and being more collaborative in that way is going to lead to the type of innovation that every field needs to be able to actually serve the next generation and serve people who've been traditionally underserved by the media to begin with. So it's exciting.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting close to our time. I am going to take this last question from the chat, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Heaston to wrap up today's discussion. The chat, we have a question from Aaron Sanderford. Aaron's asking, what ways have each of you found that helped you bridge the trust gap between traditional media outlets your organizations want to partner with and your reporters, documenters? What has helped? So that's the first part, get you on that. And the second part, if we can get to it, is how much of the challenges you face is getting people to just accept that the definition of reporters is changing.
I'd say a pretty good amount of it has to do with that last part. I think we are actively in the process of changing the definition of what journalism can mean. I think that's hugely exciting and overdue in a lot of ways. The first part of the question, ways that we found to help bridge the trust gap, I think a lot of it relationships. I think it's communication. You know, sometimes just talking to some of these editors at these papers and just really getting down to what the concerns might be, the challenges are. What have we found? What are the successes? What does the future look like when we are working together? Again, all this feel of abundance phrase, but like, what does that future look like when we're all working together for it? That really just takes talking and showing the work. What does it actually do? And fortunately, we have thousands of meetings covered and thousands of documenters trained, and many instances where we can say it looks like this. You know, this is what the future can look like when communities and journalists are working together in a civic environment that is conducive to racial equity and inclusivity, and again, asset-based thinking around information.
The other thing I think that's been interesting too is when you think about, it's like, well, you're not going and covering the meeting as a reporter. What else can you be doing, and how else can you be using your time and your skills? Again, whether it's editing or being able to go more deeply and do more investigative reporting on the work, like, how do you actually, in that sense of abundance, it like actually allows journalists to do a lot of what they haven't always had time to do, especially as the newsrooms have been shrinking, to actually do that. The work of journalism has become more complex. The amount of information that they have to sift through, being able to get out and get a diverse group of sources and cross-reference things and the data sets that are available, and being able to sort through all of the data that is so hard for the average person to not just access, but make sense of. I think that you're going to see increased needs for professionally trained journalists to just do that work that is not as easy for an everyday American to be able to even understand if you just put it out there. So how do you provide that context? How do you connect those dots for folks doing more explanatory journalism? I think it's just looking, again, like you said, it's like your role's changing. It doesn't make the role of a journalist obsolete.
All right, everybody, thank you so much. I think we're going to have to wrap this up. My editorial team is going to grab this Zoom. So again, thank you, Monique, for guiding this. Thank you, Daryl, Michelle, Alan. This is such a great conversation. Katie, thank you so much for helping make this possible. And we look forward to keeping this conversation going.
Thank you for having us.
All right, have a wonderful day.
Perfect. Have a great afternoon.
You're awesome. Thank you so much.